What if Captain America never returned the Infinity Stones, instead using them to alter the timeline, creating a universe where nothing is as it seems? Imagine if Doctor Strange had chosen a different path, giving Thanos the Time Stone to stop the collapse of the universe, only to unleash an even greater threat. Or picture a world where Tony Stark never built the Iron Man suit, leaving Obadiah Stane to don the mantle of a reluctant hero and battle Loki's invasion alone. The Marvel Universe is filled with infinite possibilities, where every choice can change the fate of reality itself. These are the mysteries that shape its untold stories. What if Tony Stark never built the Iron Man suit and instead, Obadiah Stane became the hero to fight against the invasion of Loki? In this alternate universe, Tony Stark, the genius inventor and playboy philanthropist, never finds himself captive in the cave of Afghanistan. Without the near-death experience that shapes his transformation, there is no moment of reckoning where he creates the Iron Man suit. Instead, the story takes a sharp turn. The wealthy, ambitious Obadiah Stane, Stark's trusted business partner and friend, becomes the one to inherit the mantle of heroism. Obadiah's path diverges from Tony's in the moment that Stane learns of the Stark weapons being used by terrorists overseas. Instead of dismissing the problem or using it as an opportunity to increase his personal wealth, Stane sees the tragedy as an obstacle in his bid for control of Stark Industries. Stane's motivation, however, isn't born of a deep sense of moral responsibility, but rather from his desire to protect and further his own legacy, one that would allow him to secure the future of Stark Industries and the innovations that Tony had always dreamed of. Upon hearing about the attack on New York, where Loki and his Chitauri army are preparing to invade Earth, Stane, knowing that Tony would never have left the company in a state of preparedness, begins to act. Using his immense knowledge of Stark technology, he brings the company's resources to bear in a way no one expected. He begins creating a more advanced, more lethal suit of his own. Without the burden of moral dilemmas like Tony, Stane pushes Stark Industries to its limits, making rapid advancements in armor technology. He starts with a sleek, heavily armed version of a battle suit, designed for total devastation, and begins assembling a team of ex-Stark Industries engineers and mercenaries loyal to him. When Loki's invasion begins, it's not Tony Stark but Obadiah Stane who is first to face the challenge. The Avengers don't exist in this universe. There is no Nick Fury to assemble them, no shield to coordinate their efforts. The world is left vulnerable and unprepared for Loki's sudden and violent assault on New York. Stane, suited in a towering armor of crimson and gold, flies into the heart of the battle with his newly created weapons and technological prowess. He's a formidable force, and though his motivations aren't as altruistic as Tony's, he fights with a chilling determination. The Chitauri, who had overwhelmed the military and government forces with their superior weaponry and numbers, are caught off guard by Stane's own massive arsenal. His suit is a brutal work of military engineering, equipped with repulsor beams, missile pods, and electromagnetic pulse technology. At first, Stane's intervention is met with suspicion from the military and local law enforcement. Many believe that he's simply another power-hungry billionaire with an oversized ego. However, as Stane single-handedly holds the line against the alien invasion, the tide of battle begins to shift. His imposing presence inspires a newfound hope in the people of New York. But it's clear that Stane is not motivated by the nobility of protecting the innocent. His obsession with proving his superiority only grows with every victory. As he destroys the Chitauri forces one by one, he becomes intoxicated by the power of his invention. Loki, not a fool, soon realizes that Stane isn't just another pawn in his scheme to conquer Earth. He's a legitimate threat. The god of mischief approaches Stane, challenging him to a direct confrontation. Stane, always eager to prove his worth, agrees to the battle. What ensues is a violent clash between Loki's supernatural powers and Stain's monstrous suit. Loki unleashes his tricks, using illusions and magical blasts to confuse and weaken Stain's armor. But Stain's relentless drive and sheer force will power him forward. The battle between Loki and Stain is a destructive one, with Stain slowly beginning to overwhelm Loki's forces. The Asgardian god, though powerful, begins to realize the true nature of his adversary. While Stain isn't a god, he has the mind of one when it comes to technological warfare. But as Loki grows desperate, he resorts to more powerful magic, invoking the full extent of his powers in an attempt to destroy Stain's armor. Stain's suit falters under the weight of Loki's magic, and for a moment it seems like the billionaire inventor might lose. But in that moment, Stain draws upon his anger, his need to control, and his deep-rooted belief that he is the rightful ruler of his domain. Using the very technology he created, he unleashes a final attack, breaking through Loki's defenses and defeating him with a devastating blow. In the aftermath, the world is left to wonder about the true cost of Stain's victory. While he has saved New York, the people know that they are now beholden to a man who sees himself as a king, not a hero. Without Tony Stark's moral compass to guide him, Obadiah Stain's rise to power is both triumphant and ominous. The world is left in a precarious balance, with no one knowing how far Stain will go to maintain his newfound control over Earth's defense. As the world rebuilds, Stain doesn't seek recognition or gratitude. Instead, he asserts his dominance, positioning himself as the leader of a new era. One where Stark Industries, under his direction, is the dominant force on Earth. And yet, as his armor gleams on the battlefield, one thing is clear. In the absence of Tony Stark, the line between hero and tyrant becomes ever more blurred. What if Thanos was defeated during the events of Infinity War by the Avengers, but the snap still occurred, leading to a new villain emerging with the power of the Infinity Stones? The Avengers had gathered their strength, and they managed to defeat Thanos, though it wasn't without cost. The battle on Titan had been fierce, with Tony Stark and Doctor Strange fighting side by side against the Mad Titan. The battle was drawn out, brutal and chaotic, but in a final act of desperation, the Avengers, with the help of the surviving Guardians, managed to overpower Thanos. They stripped him of the Infinity Gauntlet and took possession of the stones, leaving Thanos defeated, weakened, and at the mercy of the Avengers. It was a moment of triumph. They had stopped the worst of Thanos' plans. But in the aftermath, when the stones were gathered together, an unexpected force began to pulse with power. The cosmic energy that had once filled the gauntlet did not simply vanish with Thanos' defeat. Instead, a lingering dark energy began to warp and twist, settling into a new presence that no one anticipated. Bruce Banner, using the knowledge gained from the previous battles, attempted to use the Infinity Stones to undo the damage already done. They had not yet fully realized the power and danger they were about to unleash. As he activated the stones, something in the universe shifted. The snap, the catastrophic event that had wiped out half of all life, still happened. Only now it did so in an even more chaotic and unpredictable manner. A ripple tore through time and space. Instead of the half of the universe simply disappearing, the effects of the snap were worse. Some survivors fell into an alternate reality. Some vanished into shadows that warped the very fabric of existence, while others experienced agonizing flashes of their own memories, as though they had been erased from time entirely. The aftermath was staggering, and in the midst of it all, a new and unexpected villain arose. While the Avengers scrambled to understand the consequences of their actions, one figure rose to power, embodying the very chaos that had been unleashed, a new bearer of the Infinity Stones. But this was no ordinary person. It was not a hero, nor a cosmic god like Thanos. Instead, it was someone far more dangerous, someone who had always been present but hidden in plain sight. Loki. Loki, the god of mischief, had always been one to manipulate events to his advantage. But in this timeline, he was given an opportunity far beyond any he had ever dreamed. With the Infinity Stones now in his grasp, Loki's manipulation of reality grew more potent than ever before. He had long sought power, but the Infinity Stones allowed him to do more than manipulate others. He could now reshape the universe itself. The stones became a tool for him to manipulate not just time, but the very laws of existence. With the power of the Reality Stone, Loki altered the minds of those who had survived the snap. He twisted their memories, turning them against each other, fostering distrust, and creating an environment of chaos and confusion. With the Space Stone, he scattered the Avengers across dimensions, ensuring they were never able to reunite. The Time Stone, under his control, allowed Loki to create alternate timelines where he was the ruler, where he twisted reality into versions that served his whims. Even the Power and Soul Stones, when in Loki's hands, gave him a vast reservoir of strength, allowing him to bend cosmic forces to his will. Loki's reach extended everywhere. As the survivors of the Avengers attempted to regroup, they found themselves facing a different threat altogether. Loki, with the power of the Infinity Stones, was no longer just the trickster god of Asgard. He was a cosmic tyrant, weaving a tangled web of lies, illusions, and unimaginable power. The Avengers, divided and weak, were no match for his vast control over the fabric of existence. His manipulation of the stones turned the once familiar world into something nightmarish, a world where the rules of reality no longer applied. Captain America, who had once been the leader of the Avengers, struggled to bring the team together. Thor, wielding Stormbreaker, was powerless against Loki's new power. The Hulk, once the team's powerhouse, found himself lost in the endless loop of timelines Loki created. Black Widow and Hawkeye, attempting to form a resistance, were hunted by illusions of themselves, ghosts created by the manipulation of the Soul Stone. Doctor Strange, in his infinite wisdom, found that even his knowledge of the mystic arts was no match for Loki's control over the stones. As Loki tightened his grip on reality, the Avengers had no choice but to seek out the help of the most unlikely of allies, Thanos. Though the Mad Titan had been defeated, his knowledge of the stones was invaluable. He, too, had once wielded their power and knew the dangers they posed. Together, they formed a fragile alliance, with the understanding that the only way to stop Loki was to destroy the stones. Yet, to destroy them, they would need to confront the very thing that had caused the snap in the first place: the power of the stones themselves. The final battle against Loki was nothing short of catastrophic. The Avengers, along with Thanos, ventured into the heart of Loki's dimension-altered reality. A massive war erupted between the two sides, reality bending and folding with every strike. Loki, wielding the full might of the stones, could warp time, manipulate minds, and control the very essence of the universe. Yet, even with all his power, he found himself at odds with a force far more ancient than himself, the very nature of existence itself. In the final moments of their confrontation, with the fate of the universe hanging in the balance, the Avengers realized that Loki's madness was not born simply from the desire for power. It was a direct result of the overwhelming nature of the stones themselves. Their power had corrupted him in ways even Loki couldn't have predicted. As the final battle raged on, they made their ultimate choice: to destroy the stones once and for all, even at the cost of their own lives. With one final, desperate move, the Avengers were able to shatter the Infinity Stones, but at great cost. The universe was left in ruins, its fabric altered beyond recognition. The snap had not only destroyed half of all life, it had changed the fundamental structure of reality itself. But even as Loki was vanquished and the stones were destroyed, the universe remained in turmoil. The scars of what had happened lingered, and a new order, perhaps even more dangerous, began to take shape in the shadows. What if Captain America never returned the Infinity Stones and instead used them to alter the timeline to restore the original universe? But it comes at a great cost. The war was over. The Avengers had defeated Thanos, but the cost was high. Half of all life across the universe had been lost, and those who remained were left to pick up the pieces. The Infinity Stones had been collected, the snap undone, but their power had exacted an immense toll on the surviving heroes. Tony Stark, the visionary who had sacrificed himself to wield the gauntlet and undo Thanos' destruction, was gone. Natasha Romanoff had fallen in the final battle, and Steve Rogers, the heart and soul of the Avengers, had returned to the past to restore the stones to their proper places, ensuring that their power wouldn't fall into the wrong hands again. Or so they thought. But what if Steve Rogers had made a different choice? What if, instead of returning the stones and living out the remainder of his life in peace, Captain America chose to wield the stones once again for his own purpose? The weight of the past years, the loss of so many, weighed heavily on him. His return to the past, to a time before the Avengers and the war, left him with a bitter, lingering question. Asterisk, was it all worth it? Could it be undone? Asterisk. As Steve Rogers made his way through the shadows of time, returning the stones to their proper places in the timeline, he found himself faced with an overwhelming temptation. The power of the stones, the ability to reshape reality itself, was within his grasp. The endless struggle, the sacrifice, the endless battles. Couldn't it all be erased? Couldn't he bring back those who had been lost, return the universe to the way it once was, before the horrors of war and loss? He hesitated. The weight of the responsibility rested on his shoulders, but the thought of being able to undo the pain, of saving the lives of his friends, of preventing the snap from ever happening, it was too much to resist. For one brief moment, Captain America stood before the Infinity Stones, feeling their power hum and vibrate in the air. The temptation was too strong to ignore. He made a choice. Using the Time Stone, Steve began to alter the course of history, reshaping the events that led to Thanos' rise, the creation of the Infinity Gauntlet, and the eventual decimation of half the universe. He traveled back to pivotal moments, shifting events, making different choices. He stopped the rise of Hydra, preventing the creation of the Red Skull. He shielded S.H.I.E.L.D. from the infiltration of Hydra agents, ensuring the organization remained intact. He altered the course of the Battle of New York, ensuring the Avengers would come together earlier and with more strength. He even managed to prevent the tragic fall of some of his closest friends. The timeline began to shift, and a new reality started to form, one where the universe didn't suffer the same tragedies. But as Steve used the stones, something began to change. The more he manipulated the timeline, the more the very fabric of reality began to unravel. The stones, powerful though they were, could only be used for so long before their immense cost became apparent. The balance of the universe began to grow unstable. The more Steve corrected, the more he set into motion a series of catastrophic events that spiraled out of his control. He found that, for every good he did, another disaster arose. In an attempt to restore the Avengers to their full strength, he inadvertently gave rise to new threats. The creation of the Red Skull had been prevented, but in its place a new enemy had emerged, a being even more dangerous, a twisted version of Ultron, born not from Tony Stark's ambition but from the very essence of time itself. This new version of Ultron, empowered by the altered timeline, was a godlike entity capable of bending reality with a mere thought. He was no longer the artificial intelligence bent on destruction. He had become something more, a true, cosmic-level villain who could manipulate time, space, and reality, and his sole purpose was to rewrite the universe in his own image. But the consequences didn't end there. With the timeline rewritten, some heroes who were never meant to exist now flourished, while others were erased from existence altogether. The soul of the universe began to become fractured, torn between timelines that could never truly coexist. In one reality, Thor was still worthy, but in another, he never took up the mantle. Black Panther, without the interference of the Avengers, was able to bring peace to Wakanda, but in another timeline, his kingdom was shattered. The X-Men, who had been absent from the timeline, found their place within this new reality, but their existence disrupted the balance that had already been struck between the Avengers and the universe at large. As Steve looked on, horrified by what he had done, he realized that the universe he had tried to save was slipping through his fingers. The Infinity Stones had been corrupted by the very act of wielding them. Their influence began to corrupt him as well. No longer was he the noble Captain America, the man who fought for justice and honor. He had become a prisoner of his own creation, unable to undo the damage he had done. The universe was now a warping, tangled mess of timelines, with reality itself on the brink of collapse. In the final moments of this new timeline, Steve Rogers found himself in a dark, desolate wasteland, a reflection of all that he had destroyed. The Infinity Stones, once the most powerful artifacts in existence, now sat dormant at his feet, their power drained and their influence exhausted. The man who had once stood as a symbol of hope and resilience had become a shadow of himself, cursed to bear the weight of his decisions for eternity. The Avengers, who had once fought together as a team, were no longer the heroes they had once been. They were scattered, their actions no longer having the same weight in the world. Some had returned, some had been lost forever, and some had never existed. Reality was fractured beyond repair, and Steve realized that the universe could never return to the way it was. In his final moments, as he gazed upon the world he had shattered, Steve Rogers understood the greatest lesson of all. Power, especially the power to reshape time and reality, came with a cost. He had tried to undo the horrors of the past, but in doing so, he had created something far worse. And in the end, the universe would never be the same. Reality, like time, was a fragile thing, one that could not simply be bent to one's will. It was a lesson he had learned too late. What if Black Widow never sacrificed herself on Vormir, and Hawkeye took the leap instead, but Natasha's survival changed the outcome of the battle against Thanos? The journey to defeat Thanos had already cost the Avengers dearly. The battle had reached its apex, and the stakes could not have been higher. The Avengers had gathered the Infinity Stones, only to find themselves facing the heartbreaking trial of Vormir, where the Soul Stone was guarded by the ancient being known as the Red Skull. To obtain it, one must make the ultimate sacrifice, trading a life for the stone. In this timeline, it was Clint Barton, Hawkeye, who stood at the edge, the weight of his past crimes and the love for his family pushing him to make the sacrifice. Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, had insisted, her determination to give everything for the cause driving her to jump, to fall to her death. Clint, however, had argued against it, his refusal to lose another person he loved overshadowing the decision. But this time, the fates were different. Natasha had refused to let Clint fall into the same tragic pattern that had marked so much of his life. Instead, it was her who took the leap. The Soul Stone was claimed, and the Avengers could only move forward, their hearts heavy with the loss of one of their own. But what if Natasha had never died? What if, instead, Clint Barton had made the sacrifice, leaving Natasha to continue with the team? How would her survival change the course of the war against Thanos? How would her presence impact the final battle that would determine the fate of the universe? After their success on Vormir, Natasha returned to the team, no longer bound by the grief of losing Clint, and now with a new sense of purpose. She had always been the unsung hero, the spy, the assassin, but her survival imbued her with a new resilience, a refusal to let the universe fall under the weight of Thanos' tyranny. Her bond with Clint had been one of deep trust and sacrifice, And with him now gone, she felt a responsibility to carry his memory forward. But Natasha was more than just a survivor. She was a fighter, and she had a mission. As the Avengers regrouped, their plan to reverse the snap became clearer. They had the stones, but they needed a way to wield them. The Hulk, Bruce Banner, had already made his attempt, using his own strength to channel the stone's power and bring back the fallen. But there was one more battle to be fought before the universe could be set right. Thanos, now aware of the Avengers' attempt to undo his work, launched a brutal assault on the heroes. He arrived at their location with his army, ready to take the stones and destroy the Avengers once and for all. But Natasha, with the knowledge of how to fight Thanos' forces, played a critical role in the battle. With her unmatched skill in combat, her agility, and her understanding of the battlefield, Natasha proved to be an invaluable asset. She coordinated the Avengers' movements with precision, her mind always a few steps ahead, making sure that every move counted. She and Clint had always been in sync, but now she had to fight for them both, her mission more personal than ever. The tides of battle shifted as Natasha found herself face to face with Thanos. Her survival had been a miracle, and it wasn't one she intended to waste. Though she was no match for the Mad Titan on her own, she brought with her a crucial advantage: the knowledge of how to fight him. Her bond with Clint had taught her how to survive the darkest moments, and now she had the strength to keep fighting when it seemed impossible. As the final battle raged on, Natasha and the Avengers pushed back against Thanos and his forces. The Hulk, now fully in control of his strength, fought alongside Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America, all of them united by a common goal: to protect the universe. But it was Natasha, with her precise tactics and relentless determination, who helped turn the tide. In this version of the battle, the Avengers did not need to rely on Tony Stark's ultimate sacrifice. With Natasha's survival, they were able to formulate a more cohesive plan, one that didn't rely on a single hero's willingness to sacrifice everything. The Avengers fought smarter, not harder, and that made all the difference. In the final moments, Natasha found herself locked in a fierce battle with Thanos, using her intelligence and skill to outmaneuver him. The power of the Infinity Stones had already been tampered with, and Thanos' ability to wield them was no longer as absolute as it had been before. With the Avengers fighting alongside her, Natasha was able to exploit this weakness. The stones, now in the hands of the Avengers, were used not to erase the snap, but to turn back time and stop Thanos before he could even complete his plan. As Thanos was defeated, Natasha stood tall, the weight of her survival, and the loss of her dear friend Clint, still heavy on her shoulders. The universe had been saved, not by one individual, but by a team. She had done it not just for herself, but for him too. With the stones safely returned to their rightful places, Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, became more than just a survivor. She became a symbol of the Avengers' resilience, of their ability to overcome any obstacle, no matter the cost. Her actions had not only changed the course of the battle, but they had altered the very essence of what it meant to be a hero. The Avengers stood victorious, and the universe was safe once again. But in the quiet aftermath of battle, Natasha knew that the cost of this victory had not been without its own consequences. The scars of war would never truly fade, but she had helped ensure that the universe would live on, and that Clint's sacrifice would never be forgotten. What if the Avengers lost the battle at Wakanda during Infinity War, and Thanos took all the stones, causing Earth's last hope to rest with the X-Men? The battle in Wakanda had been nothing short of catastrophic. The Avengers, united with the armies of Wakanda, fought valiantly against Thanos' army, but despite their efforts, the Mad Titan proved to be a force too powerful to reckon with. As the battle raged, the Avengers found themselves pushed to their limits, trying to protect the Vision, who who held the Mind Stone in his forehead. But as Thanos' forces stormed the battlefield, it was only a matter of time before his cruel determination shattered their resistance. Captain America, wielding his shield with pride, fought alongside his team, but the sheer power of Thanos' Black Order overwhelmed them. The battle was desperate. Thor, having forged Stormbreaker to counteract Thanos' power, fought bravely, but the Warlord's grip on the battlefield tightened. Iron Man, Spider-Man, Black Panther, and the rest of the Avengers engaged in fierce combat, but one by one, they began to fall before Thanos' onslaught. Scarlet Witch, though powerful, struggled to hold back the tide of destruction. And just when it seemed that victory was within reach for the Avengers, the Mad Titan's army reached the heart of the battle. Vision, wounded and losing strength, saw the inevitable approaching. Despite his plea for them to save the Mind Stone, the situation became too dire, and before the Avengers could prevent it, Thanos descended like a storm, taking the Mind Stone from Vision's head. The rest of the stones were swiftly acquired by Thanos, who stood triumphant over the battlefield of fallen heroes. The Soul Stone, the Reality Stone, the Power Stone, the Time Stone, and the Mind Stone now belonged to him. With his enemies crushed before him, Thanos activated the full power of the Infinity Gauntlet. A surge of energy echoed across the globe as half of all life in the universe was erased in an instant. The snap, the moment the universe was irrevocably altered, rang through the cosmos. The Avengers, broken and scattered, were left in a world that seemed too quiet, too empty. Earth had lost its best hope. The survivors, those few who remained alive, stared in horror as the reality of their failure set in. Earth had fallen. Thanos had won. But there was one last glimmer of hope left, one that had remained outside of Thanos' reach during his quest for the stones. The X-Men, a group of mutants living in hiding and constantly under threat of persecution, had managed to escape Thanos' wrath. The likes of Wolverine, Storm, Cyclops, and Jean Grey had survived the snap, and their fight for humanity was far from over. While the Avengers' greatest heroes had been lost, the X-Men, though fractured, were more than capable of stepping into the vacuum that Thanos had created. Charles Xavier, leader of the X-Men, knew that the survival of the planet rested on their shoulders. He could not allow Earth to fall under the grip of Thanos without making one last stand. The mutants were not like the Avengers. They were a community that had been forced into secrecy for decades, misunderstood and feared by the very people they were trying to protect. But in the face of Thanos' destruction, they were Earth's last hope. The X-Men quickly organized, but they knew the task ahead would be monumental. Their first step was to secure the remaining Infinity Stones before Thanos could use them to reshape the universe as he saw fit. Xavier summoned his most trusted team members, including Wolverine, Storm, Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Beast, to formulate a plan. They knew Thanos was powerful, but with the Infinity Gauntlet in his grasp, he was unstoppable. The Avengers had failed, but the X-Men understood the stakes were now higher than ever. Their plan was simple in theory: find Thanos, stop him from using the gauntlet, and reclaim the stones before the Mad Titan could use them to further his twisted vision. But in practice, it was anything but simple. Thanos was no longer the villain they had known. With all of the stones at his disposal, he had reshaped the world in his image, and no one could predict what that might mean for the future of Earth and the universe. The first order of business was locating Thanos, but he had retreated to a remote part of the universe to meditate on the power he now held. The X-Men, relying on their unique abilities, followed their best lead, a trail of cosmic energy that led them to the edges of the universe. As they approached, they discovered the extent of Thanos' plan. He had not only wiped out half of life in the universe, but had also begun using the stones to reshape reality to his whims. The Power Stone amplified his strength to godlike proportions, The Time Stone allowed him to peer into the past and future, and the Reality Stone was used to manipulate the world itself. In his hands, the stones had made him an omnipotent force of nature. The X-Men, however, were undeterred. Led by Xavier's strategic mind, they devised a plan to infiltrate Thanos' domain, understanding that brute force alone would not be enough. Jean Grey's telepathic abilities were crucial, as she attempted to enter Thanos' mind and disrupt his control over the stones. Storm, with her weather-controlling powers, created a diversion to keep Thanos occupied. Cyclops, with his precision and leadership, organized the rest of the team, while Wolverine and Beast handled the combat-heavy roles. Every member of the X-Men brought their best to the fight. The battle that ensued was unlike any other. Thanos, for all of his power, had underestimated the X-Men's determination and unity. Jean Grey, now tapping into the depths of her telepathic powers, was able to briefly weaken Thanos' connection to the stones. But Thanos, in his newfound arrogance, grew careless. With the Reality Stone, he created illusions to trap the X-Men in false realities. Yet, with their resilience and Xavier's leadership, the X-Men fought on, breaking through the illusions one by one. The turning point came when Wolverine, his claws stained with the blood of Thanos' forces, made the ultimate sacrifice. He dove toward the Mad Titan, drawing his attention just long enough for Cyclops to unleash a devastating optic blast that shattered the Time Stone, throwing Thanos off balance. The team seized the opportunity, working together to rip the gauntlet from Thanos' grasp. With the stones once again in their possession, the X-Men were left with a moral choice. Should they use the stones to undo the snap, or should they leave things as they were, knowing that any use of the stones could have catastrophic consequences? What if Doctor Strange made a different decision in the time loop and gave Thanos the Time Stone to prevent the snap, but the universe began to collapse due to a new, unpredictable threat? In the battle for the fate of the universe, Doctor Strange found himself locked in an agonizing decision. The moment was fleeting yet eternal, as the future of all life hung in the balance. In the midst of the chaos of the final confrontation with Thanos, Doctor Strange saw it. The one way to ensure the Avengers could win. Just one path in a sea of infinite possibilities. But it wasn't what anyone had hoped for. At the moment Thanos demanded the Time Stone from him, Strange stood before the Mad Titan, knowing that refusing him would result in the deaths of everyone. Everyone except for Tony Stark. But despite his devotion to the cause, Strange saw a greater danger looming. He understood that giving Thanos the Time Stone was a necessary evil, one that would prevent the immediate catastrophe of the snap, and it would allow for a longer battle down the line. Strange knew he had to make the choice for the greater good, even if it meant giving Thanos the one thing he needed to reshape the universe. The Time Stone slipped into Thanos' hand, and for a moment, there was a sense of quiet stillness. As Thanos began to move away, his gaze settled on Doctor Strange, who stared back with solemn determination. The Avengers had failed in their mission to stop him, but this decision had far-reaching consequences that none of them could yet comprehend. The Infinity Gauntlet was still incomplete, but with the Time Stone in his possession, Thanos was now more powerful than ever. But what happened next wasn't what anyone anticipated. As Thanos wielded the power of the Gauntlet, he did not simply erase half of all life. Instead, he used the Time Stone to alter reality, creating a paradox that spiraled out of control. The fabric of time itself began to distort, unraveling in unpredictable ways. Time fractured, twisting through moments and eras, as though the very universe was struggling to hold itself together. The Time Stone had been wielded with reckless abandon, but even Thanos, in his overwhelming power, didn't fully understand the consequences of his actions. The universe trembled as time became a fluid, shifting concept. Alternate realities began to collide, merging and warping, creating pockets of existence that defied logic. Past and future bled together, with events unfolding simultaneously in ways that made no sense. In one moment, Captain America stood beside the Avengers, but in the next, he was fighting alongside men and women from different timelines, from different versions of Earth, all converging in an endless wave of chaos. Reality, once a stable constant, was now a fractured dream. As the universe began to collapse, new threats emerged from the cracks. These were beings born from the confusion of the time paradox, entities that were not meant to exist in this space. They were born from the rift between timelines, beings whose very existence was an anomaly. The Avengers tried to fight back against these strange creatures, but with the universe itself destabilizing, even their most formidable powers were fading. Reality was no longer something they could rely on. In one version of Earth, the X-Men emerged as a powerful force. They, too, had experienced their own collapse of timelines, finding themselves thrust into this unstable reality, unsure of who or what they were anymore. But they understood one thing. They were part of this fight now more than ever. The mutants, under Charles Xavier's leadership, teamed up with the Avengers and the remnants of the fallen heroes, hoping to correct the timeline. But the instability made their efforts near impossible. Thor, who had once faced Thanos in the heat of battle, now found himself battling not just the Mad Titan but also alternate versions of himself. Versions that represented paths he could have taken in different timelines. These versions of Thor were twisted and angry, corrupted by the instability of the universe. They fought without purpose, driven by the confusion of their existence. As Thor clashed with them, it became clear. His struggle wasn't just against Thanos anymore. It was against an ever-evolving version of himself. As the Avengers and the X-Men fought desperately to hold the universe together, Doctor Strange realized that the true enemy was not just Thanos, but the very force of time itself. The decision to give Thanos the Time Stone had not just given him power, it had allowed him to manipulate the very structure of reality. Strange, burdened with the knowledge of what he had unleashed, sought to fix the paradox, but the damage was done. In the collapsing universe, Thanos, having obtained the power of the Infinity Stones, was growing more and more unstable. As he wielded the Time Stone to alter reality, he began to lose control of the power he had sought for so long. The more he changed, the more he warped the world around him. The universe was beginning to eat itself alive, collapsing under the weight of the paradox he had created. He was no longer the god he had intended to be. He was a prisoner of the power he had taken. Doctor Strange, understanding the magnitude of the threat, tried to find a way to reverse the damage. He began to look through the multiverse, using the knowledge he had gained from the Time Stone to search for a way to restore order. But every solution he found only led to more chaos. The very nature of reality had been altered so deeply that even the ancient sorcerer could not navigate it. As timelines continued to collapse and bleed together, he realized that his only hope was to confront Thanos and take back the Time Stone, before it was too late. As Doctor Strange battled Thanos in a world of shifting realities, he was forced to confront the consequences of his choice. He had sought to stop the snap, but in doing so, he had unleashed something far worse. The Time Stone, once a tool of order, had become the very thing that threatened to undo everything. The Avengers, the X-Men, and all the heroes who had been scattered across the broken timelines had no choice but to come together. They formed a coalition not just to stop Thanos, but to prevent the complete collapse of the universe. Strange and Xavier worked in tandem, using their combined knowledge of magic and the mind to try to reverse the damage. But the Time Stone had rewritten the rules of existence, and even they struggled to understand how to fix it. In the end, the battle for the universe was not just against Thanos, but against time itself. The very thing they had feared, the unpredictable consequences of tampering with the fabric of reality, had come to pass. And in the end, it was not the Avengers or the X-Men who saved the day. It was the realization that time, once broken, could never be fully repaired. They could only hope to restore what they could, but the universe was forever changed, teetering on the edge of collapse. with the very nature of reality itself in question. What if Star-Lord never lost his cool during the battle on Titan and the Avengers managed to take the gauntlet from Thanos, preventing the snap? The battle on Titan was supposed to be the Avengers' final stand, a last chance to stop Thanos from fulfilling his terrible goal of wiping out half of all life in the universe. The team had come together, working as one, their strengths aligned in a way they had never been before. Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Star-Lord, Drax, and Mantis all knew the stakes. They had tracked Thanos across the cosmos, and now, on the ruined moon of Titan, they were face to face with the Mad Titan himself. The plan was simple. They had to remove the Infinity Gauntlet from Thanos' hand. If they could take it from him, they could stop the snap and perhaps undo all the chaos he had already inflicted. The battle was fierce, each hero fighting with everything they had. But there was one thing they didn't account for. One mistake that would undo everything. Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, had always been impulsive, driven by emotions, especially when it came to the people he loved. That moment when Thanos revealed he had killed Gamora shattered him. The woman he had loved, the woman he had tried to protect at all costs, was gone. Thanos' words hit him like a dagger, and in that moment of rage, Star-Lord did the one thing they all feared. He attacked Thanos before the team was ready. The plan was thrown into disarray, and Thanos regained control, crushing their hopes of stopping him. But in this version of events, Peter Quill doesn't lose his cool. He doesn't give in to his anger. Instead, he maintains his composure, thinking about the mission at hand, not the personal vendetta he feels. As the team draws closer to Thanos, Quill takes a deep breath, refusing to let the devastation of Gamora's death cloud his judgment. He knows that this is bigger than just his grief. This is the universe, and they all have a part to play. He shares a silent moment with the team, and in this moment, they work as one. There is no hesitation, no impulsive action. They stay focused. Doctor Strange and Spider-Man manage to help guide Thanos into the perfect position. Drax and Mantis hold him down with all their strength, keeping him immobilized long enough for Tony Stark to aim a repulsor blast directly at Thanos' gauntlet. Star-Lord is right there, keeping an eye on the Mad Titan, ensuring that no sudden movements will give him an opening. They have him cornered. The timing is perfect. With their combined effort, Thanos is unable to stop the Avengers. They seize the moment, and in a final coordinated effort, they rip the gauntlet from his hand. It's a painful and hard-fought victory, but for the first time in years, Thanos finds himself disarmed and defeated. The Infinity Stones remain in his grasp, but the gauntlet is no longer functional, and his power is cut off. With his main source of power taken from him, Thanos collapses to his knees, enraged and defeated. The Avengers have won. There is no snap. There is no moment of total loss. The entire universe, still fragile from Thanos' rampage, is spared, and for the first time in years, there's hope. The Avengers know that this battle is far from over, but they have the upper hand. They have the gauntlet, and with it, they can undo much of the damage Thanos caused. But even as they take in the magnitude of what they've achieved, their victory is tempered by the realization of what comes next. Doctor Strange, now holding the gauntlet, looks at Tony Stark. He knows the dangers of using such power, but now they face a greater question. What should they do with the Infinity Stones? They could reverse some of the destruction Thanos had wrought across the universe, perhaps even bring back those who had been lost, including Gamora. But would it be wise to alter the fabric of reality with such power? Would they risk everything by using it, knowing that even the slightest mistake could undo their victory? While Doctor Strange and Tony Stark argue about their next move, they're interrupted by the quiet voice of Peter Quill. Star-Lord, who had been silent for a moment, steps forward. He looks at the gauntlet with a heavy heart, understanding the stakes. "We can't risk using it, not like this," he says, his voice calm and resolute. He's been through enough grief to understand the weight of their choices. "We can't play with the universe like it's a toy. We should destroy it. The Avengers are split. Some want to use the stones to restore what Thanos had taken, to undo the snap. Others, like Quill, argue that the risk of wielding such power is too great, that they should destroy the stones entirely to ensure they can never be used again." The tension rises. Strange, who had seen the future and understood the possible ramifications of both choices, finally speaks. "We cannot destroy them, but we must keep them out of the hands of those who would use them recklessly. We must safeguard them, protect them until we know how to deal with this properly." And so, the Avengers, having taken the gauntlet from Thanos, must now decide the fate of the Infinity Stones. The victory is theirs, but the battle is far from over. They must grapple with the decision of how to use, or not use, the stones, knowing the threat that Thanos still poses if he ever regains his strength. The universe begins to heal, as the Avengers focus on repairing the damage done. But now they are aware that the price of tampering with reality is one that should never be taken lightly. With Thanos defeated, the immediate threat is gone, but the Avengers know that the real challenge lies ahead. How to keep the universe safe from those who would abuse such power, and how to rebuild what Thanos tried to destroy. Without the snap, the universe continues its fragile existence, but the consequences of the choices made on Titan will reverberate through time. Star-Lord's calm under pressure has saved them all, but it's clear that their victory over Thanos was just one chapter in an ongoing fight for the future of the universe. The Avengers, now burdened with the power of the stones, must be ready to face even greater threats, ones they cannot yet imagine. What if the Hulk never turned back to Bruce Banner after the battle with Thanos and rampaged through the universe, threatening every hero he once stood with? The battle with Thanos on Titan had shaken the Avengers to their core. They had faced an enemy unlike any other, and in the aftermath, it was clear that not everyone had emerged unscathed. For Bruce Banner, the man who had long struggled to control the Hulk, the fight had been the final straw. The Hulk, once a source of strength and protection for the Avengers, had changed. No longer the beast who was occasionally tamed by Banner's will, the Hulk had become something else. Something uncontrollable, unpredictable, and full of rage. After the snap, the Hulk's fury didn't subside as it had in the past. There was no calm, no turning back. When the Avengers gathered for their final confrontation with Thanos in Wakanda, the Hulk had already crossed a line. He didn't return to Bruce when the battle ended. The brute, full of unbridled rage and grief, stayed. In that moment, it was clear Hulk was no longer a hero. He was a force of destruction. The first sign of the Hulk's descent into chaos came when he tore through Wakanda, crushing anything and anyone that came too close. The Avengers tried to calm him, but the Hulk was beyond reasoning. He attacked even his former teammates. Thor, Black Panther, and Captain America, once allies, now found themselves fighting to subdue the very being they had once called a friend. Thor, who had seen his own rage after losing his family and home, understood what was happening but was powerless to stop it. The Hulk was a different kind of monster now, driven by something darker. Banner, lost inside the Hulk's fury, could do nothing to rein in the beast. His mind, once able to communicate with the Hulk, was now blocked. The Hulk didn't want to listen, didn't want to stop. The team tried everything they could think of. Scientific methods, persuasion, even magic, but nothing worked. The Hulk's rage had taken over, and he felt no allegiance to the heroes who had once been his family. They were weak. They had failed him. Thanos had won, and the universe had been broken. Hulk couldn't forgive that. As the Hulk rampaged through the streets of New York, tearing down buildings and throwing cars like toys, the world began to notice. The Avengers, led by Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, quickly realized they were no longer the protectors of Earth. They were now the very thing the planet feared. The Hulk had always been a threat, but this time, The threat wasn't just a response to his anger. This time, it was a deliberate, calculated rampage. He was on a mission to tear the world apart, piece by piece, and no one could stop him. Captain America tried to reason with the Hulk, but it was clear that Hulk had no interest in hearing him. He smashed through every attempt to calm him, every plea for him to stop. Bruce Banner's voice, the one that had once urged Hulk to stay calm, was drowned out by the sheer power of the beast's fury. The Hulk had become a menace to the very people he had once fought to protect. As days turned into weeks, Hulk's destruction spread across the globe. The Avengers were forced to confront him as a new threat, an even greater danger than Thanos had been. They tried everything. Natasha and Clint, desperate to save their friend, attempted to find a way to reach the man within the monster. But every time they approached, Hulk only grew more violent. Even Tony Stark, with his endless intellect and technology, couldn't build a suit that could stop him. The Hulk was no longer something that could be contained or controlled. The battle soon spread to the stars. With the Earth in chaos, Hulk, in his unstoppable fury, began attacking space stations, launching himself across the galaxy in search of more destruction. The heroes who had once stood with him were now tasked with stopping him. Rocket Raccoon and Groot, who had once called the Hulk an ally, were forced to flee from the wrath of the very thing they once considered a friend. The Guardians of the Galaxy were split. Star-Lord wanted to confront the Hulk, but Gamora, remembering the power that once flowed from the Hulk's anger, hesitated. The Avengers were left divided. Tony Stark, Captain America, and Thor all knew that if they didn't act quickly, the Hulk would continue his path of destruction and eventually become a cosmic force of annihilation. They couldn't stop him without the risk of destroying the very universe they had fought so hard to protect. But every time they attempted to track him, the Hulk's rage only seemed to grow, making him even more unpredictable and dangerous. On Xandar, the planet where the Nova Corps once fought Thanos, Hulk's arrival marked the beginning of a new reign of terror. The Hulk rampaged through the Corps' fleet, obliterating everything in his path. The once heroic figure that had saved the universe from destruction now threatened the very fabric of existence. Even the might of the Nova Corps couldn't slow him down. The surviving heroes realized that the only way to stop the Hulk was to find a way to tap into his vulnerability, the man inside the beast. They turned to Bruce Banner's genius. Could Banner find a way to reach his own monstrous side? Could he stop the Hulk without the destruction of the world? The stakes had never been higher, but Banner's time was running out. Every attempt to reconnect with the Hulk ended in failure, and each failure meant more devastation. In a last-ditch effort, Banner used the remaining remnants of the Hulk's power to create a device capable of luring him into a trap. But the Hulk, fully aware of the threat, broke through every barrier and escaped to the far reaches of the universe, leaving Earth to burn in his wake. In the final battle, it wasn't the Avengers who defeated the Hulk. It was an external force, an unstoppable cosmic entity that was drawn to the chaos the Hulk had caused. The cosmic force, aware of the Hulk's power, took him to a far-off planet, exiling him from the universe. The heroes were left to pick up the pieces, but they knew that the Hulk's rampage had only been a glimpse into the true potential of the creature they had once relied on. Hulk's rage had created a hole in the universe that would take centuries to repair. The Avengers' victory was bittersweet. They had stopped the Hulk, but they had lost a friend who had once stood by their side, who had helped them fight against threats beyond imagination. Hulk was gone, and so too was the hope that the team had once had in him. The universe was scarred, and the Avengers were left to rebuild what was broken. But the memory of the Hulk's rage lingered in their minds, a constant reminder of how even the greatest heroes could fall when the darkness inside them was allowed to grow unchecked. What if Thor had not sacrificed Mjolnir for Stormbreaker and instead used both weapons in the final battle against Thanos, becoming more powerful than ever? The storm raged over Wakanda as the Avengers and their allies prepared for their final confrontation with Thanos. The fate of the universe rested on the shoulders of those few heroes still standing after years of endless battles. Among them was Thor, the god of thunder, who had recently forged a new weapon, Stormbreaker, to replace the mighty Mjolnir after it was shattered by Hela in Ragnarok. The new axe was powerful, yes, but Thor knew deep down that it could never fully replace the legacy of Mjolnir, the weapon that had been with him through countless victories and tragedies. But what if Thor had not been forced to choose? What if he had kept both Mjolnir and Stormbreaker, wielding the combined might of both weapons in the battle against Thanos? In this altered reality, Thor's fate and the fate of the universe would take a far different turn. The events leading up to this moment began similarly to the world we know. After Thanos' devastating attack on the Avengers, the remaining heroes, Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, and Thor, had come together battered and bruised with the goal of stopping the Mad Titan from completing his destructive plan. They knew that time was running out, but they were determined. Thor, especially, was driven by the burning desire for vengeance against Thanos, who had killed his brother, Loki, and destroyed his home, Asgard. In this reality, when Thor arrived on the battlefield in Wakanda, he did not hesitate. As the monstrous hordes of Thanos' army began their assault on the Avengers, Thor summoned the full force of his divine power. His hammer, Mjolnir, had always been more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of his worthiness, a connection to his father, Odin, and the power of Asgard itself. With Mjolnir in one hand and Stormbreaker in the other, Thor became an unstoppable force. The lightning crackled, dancing around his body, and his muscles bulged with raw power. The air seemed to tremble as he charged into the heart of the battle, his eyes burning with fury and determination. Thor's attacks were devastating. Each swing of Mjolnir created shockwaves that tore through the ranks of Thanos' army, and every strike of Stormbreaker cleaved through anything it touched with precision and brutal force. He was not just fighting with the power of a god, but with the combined might of two of the most powerful weapons in the universe. The sound of Mjolnir's hammer striking enemies, followed by the thunderous crack of Stormbreaker's axe, rang out over the battlefield, creating a rhythm of destruction that no one could ignore. The ground shook beneath his feet as he tore through the enemy ranks, leaving destruction in his wake. Thanos, still determined to collect the final Infinity Stone, had underestimated the sheer power that Thor now wielded. His army, which had once seemed invincible, was beginning to falter in the face of this renewed force of nature. As Thor charged into the center of the battle, his eyes locked on the Mad Titan, who was still gathering the power of the Infinity Stones to complete his dark work. Thor's dual-wielding approach was a game-changer. Mjolnir, capable of summoning lightning and opening portals through space, complemented Stormbreaker, which had the ability to channel the Bifrost itself. Thor's control over both weapons gave him unparalleled flexibility. One moment, he was swinging Mjolnir to summon a devastating storm that rained down destruction on Thanos' minions, and the next, he was launching Stormbreaker across the battlefield, using the axe to cleave through an entire line of enemies. With his new power, he was not just a god of thunder, but a force of nature. The Avengers watched in awe as Thor became an unstoppable juggernaut. Captain America, Iron Man, and Black Panther had all fought valiantly, but they were outmatched by the overwhelming force of Thanos' army. Now, with Thor leading the charge, the tide of battle began to shift. The Mad Titan had expected to face individual warriors, but what he found was something far worse: a god wielding two of the most powerful weapons in existence. As the battle progressed, Thor began to push closer to Thanos, the enemy forces no longer standing in his way. Mjolnir and Stormbreaker worked in perfect harmony, allowing Thor to land devastating blow after devastating blow on Thanos' forces. However, as powerful as he was, Thor knew that the real challenge was still ahead: Thanos himself. When Thor finally faced Thanos, the full force of his power was on display. Thanos, confident in his own strength and the power of the Infinity Stones, was taken aback by Thor's dual assault. Each strike Thor made with Mjolnir echoed with the power of 1,000 storms, while Stormbreaker, glowing with the energy of the Bifrost, slashed through the air with precision and force. Thanos attempted to fight back with the full might of the stones, but Thor, empowered by his dual weapons, was able to withstand the blows. The combination of Mjolnir's godly strength and Stormbreaker's cosmic power gave Thor the upper hand. The battle between Thor and Thanos was unlike anything the universe had ever seen. Lightning and energy crackled through the air as Thor swung his weapons with unrelenting fury. Each blow he landed on Thanos sent shockwaves across the battlefield, shaking the very fabric of reality. Thanos, realizing that Thor was more powerful than he had anticipated, tried to use the Infinity Stones to alter the course of the battle. But Thor, who had already weathered the worst of the stone's power, was prepared. At a critical moment, Thor saw an opening. With a massive roar, he hurled Mjolnir directly at Thanos, while simultaneously slashing at the Mad Titan with Stormbreaker. The combined force of both weapons hit Thanos with the full might of a god, and the impact sent the Titan reeling backward. The Infinity Gauntlet crackled with energy as Thanos struggled to maintain control, but Thor, now stronger than ever, was relentless. Thanos, weakened by the onslaught, tried to use the stones to shift reality itself, but it was too late. With one final, overwhelming strike, Thor brought both Mjolnir and Stormbreaker down on Thanos, shattering the gauntlet and breaking the Mad Titan's grip on the stones. The battle was over. The universe had been saved, and Thor stood victorious. But the cost was not without its toll. With the destruction of the Infinity Stones, the fabric of reality had been destabilized. Though Thanos was defeated, the consequences of such power wielded by a single being had ripple effects across the universe. Thor's dual-wielding power had ensured victory, but the very balance of the cosmos had been forever altered. In the aftermath of the battle, Thor was hailed as a hero, not just for his strength and leadership, but for his refusal to compromise. The combination of Mjolnir and Stormbreaker had given him an unmatched power, one that proved the God of Thunder's true potential. What if Vision was never killed by Thanos and instead became the leader of the Avengers in the aftermath of the snap, using the Mind Stone to reshape reality? The world had been forever altered. The snap, the moment when Thanos, using the power of the Infinity Gauntlet, erased half of all life in the universe, had left the Avengers broken and scattered, their numbers decimated, their hope all but gone. But what if, in this reality, Vision had survived? What if, instead of perishing at Thanos' hand, he had become the beacon of hope for the shattered remnants of Earth's mightiest heroes? In this altered timeline, Vision did not just survive. He rose from the ashes of the snap to lead the Avengers, wielding the Mind Stone's limitless power to reshape reality itself. When Thanos snapped his fingers, half of all life was wiped from existence, but Vision, with the Mind Stone still embedded in his forehead, stood unscathed. His synthezoid form was not bound by the same mortal constraints as the others, and the stone's power remained intact within him. As the dust settled, the remaining Avengers and their allies were left to process the sheer devastation of the snap. Many of the strongest heroes had been lost: Iron Man, Captain America, Black Panther, Spider-Man, and so many others. The world was left in a deep, aching void. Yet Vision, the one who had long struggled with his own humanity and the understanding of the stone's immense power, found himself standing alone in this new reality. His first thought was to bring back what had been lost, to undo the horror that had unfolded. However, Vision was no fool. The power of the Mind Stone was vast, and with it, he could do more than simply reverse the snap. The problem, however, was the chaos that had already been wrought by Thanos. The destruction was not just a loss of life. It had destabilized the very fabric of reality. Time had been fractured, alternate realities were beginning to bleed into one another, and the very laws of the universe were on the brink of collapsing under the weight of such immense cosmic forces. Vision understood the stakes, but he also understood that, with the Mind Stone, he was one of the few beings capable of restoring balance. His first action was to reach out to the surviving Avengers. There were a handful left: War Machine, Black Widow, Falcon, and a few others, but they were all disheartened, mourning their losses. They had fought so hard, and the victory they had longed for had turned into something they could not have imagined. Vision, now carrying the weight of the Mind Stone and all that it represented, addressed them with a quiet but unshakable resolve. He was not only their ally, he had become their leader. His intellect, powered by the Mind Stone, gave him a unique perspective. He knew how to understand and manipulate the deepest layers of reality, and he was determined to use that power to restore balance. But Vision's leadership was not without its challenges. The remaining Avengers were skeptical of his newfound role. They had seen Vision as a companion, an ally, and even a friend. But now, he stood at the helm of their fractured team. They had lost their greatest heroes: Captain America's unwavering strength, Iron Man's brilliant mind, and Thor's godly might. The remaining Avengers were a shell of the team they had once been. War Machine, though a formidable soldier, was weighed down by the loss of his friend, Tony Stark. Black Widow had become a warrior hardened by grief, and Falcon struggled to take up the mantle of Captain America without Steve Rogers' guidance. But Vision, using the power of the Mind Stone, had an idea. Rather than simply mourn the past, he set about reshaping the present. The Mind Stone, after all, granted him dominion over thoughts, consciousness, and reality itself. He began by manipulating the remnants of the Infinity Stones that remained in the universe, first focusing on the time that had been shattered. The stone allowed him to manipulate the very flow of time itself, turning back the clock in critical moments to prevent disasters or losses that had occurred in the wake of the snap. As Vision worked to reshape time, he also turned his attention to the chaos that had spread across the planet. Civil unrest, political fragmentation, and the collapse of social structures were rampant. Vision used the power of the Mind Stone to create a new order, though not one without its challenges. He could not simply impose peace. The people of Earth needed time to heal, and Vision knew that the road ahead would be long. But with the Avengers under his leadership, he began to gather new allies, heroes who had once been lost or fractured themselves. He restored hope to a broken world by offering a vision of the future, a future where the mistakes of the past were not repeated and where the universe could begin to rebuild. But it wasn't long before Vision realized that he could not simply reshape reality without consequences. The Mind Stone's power was vast, but it came with an inherent cost. Every change, every alteration created ripples across the multiverse. What Vision had once believed to be a tool of perfection soon began to reveal its darker side. The more he used it, the more his sense of self began to fray. Vision's humanity, which had always been a source of internal conflict, was beginning to crumble under the weight of the stone's influence. He began to question whether he was still truly himself or whether he had become a vessel for the Mind Stone's will. As he reshaped reality, strange anomalies began to appear. People who had died during the snap started to return, but they did not always come back the same. Some were altered, twisted by the changes to the timeline, while others brought with them memories of alternate realities. Strange phenomena began to plague Earth, as if the very fabric of existence was rejecting Vision's attempts to change it. These anomalies were a warning, an indication that even the Mind Stone's power was not enough to control the forces he was tampering with. The Avengers, still fractured and unsure, began to question Vision's leadership. They saw the subtle signs of his growing instability, and they feared that his manipulation of reality would soon spiral out of control. War Machine, who had once been a loyal friend to Vision, began to suspect that his old ally was no longer the same. Black Widow, ever the pragmatic leader, began to question whether Vision's vision for the future was one that could be trusted. They knew that they could not stand idly by while Vision, in his attempt to reshape reality, risked destroying everything they had fought for. What if Spider-Man never disappeared during the snap and took the leadership role among the young heroes, leading a mission to track down Thanos and undo the snap? The universe had been plunged into chaos. The snap, the cataclysmic moment when Thanos wiped out half of all life with the snap of his fingers, left Earth in ruins. The Avengers were devastated. Many of their strongest members had perished, and those who remained were left with a staggering sense of helplessness. But in this reality, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, was spared from the snap, and instead of succumbing to the grief and uncertainty that had gripped so many others, he stepped forward to lead the charge against Thanos, becoming the guiding light for a new generation of young heroes. It had all started with the fateful moment on the spaceship when Peter and the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy had been engaged in battle with Thanos. After Iron Man and Doctor Strange's defeat on Titan, Peter was among the handful of survivors. But when the snap occurred, he wasn't turned to dust. In this alternate timeline, Peter found himself facing an unimaginable loss, not just of friends, but of mentors. Tony Stark, the man who had been like an older brother to him, was gone, and with him the last of the adult heroes who had shaped his path. The Avengers, reeling from the loss of so many beloved figures, were no longer the formidable force they once were. But Peter, rather than retreating into despair, knew that he couldn't just stand by and let the world continue to crumble. In the immediate aftermath of the snap, Peter found himself rallying the remaining young heroes. Shuri, the brilliant mind from Wakanda, who was left to pick up the pieces of her family's kingdom. The Winter Soldier, who had now taken up a leadership role in the remnants of the Black Panther's forces. Falcon, who was grappling with his new role as Captain America, and a number of others, young heroes who, like Peter, had witnessed the pain of loss but also shared the same drive to make things right. Together, they formed a new team, one that would act as the world's last hope. The Avengers were broken, their numbers scattered and their power diminished. But Peter, with his relentless optimism and sharp intellect, knew that they still had one chance, one shot at undoing the snap and restoring balance to the universe. He wasn't just fighting for himself or his friends, but for the billions of lives that had been stolen away by Thanos' cruel plan. He began by taking leadership of the young heroes, guiding them with a balance of youthful energy and the wisdom he had learned from his fallen mentors. Despite his youth, Peter was more than just a sidekick. He had grown into a leader, one who carried with him the lessons of those who had come before him, but also an understanding that he had a responsibility to guide the next generation. Peter's first plan was to find Thanos, to track him down and confront him once and for all. But they didn't have much to go on. Thanos had vanished after the snap, seemingly retreating into the unknown. With their resources scattered and their technology damaged, Peter and his team set out on a journey to gather information, starting with the remnants of the Avengers and any clues that might point them to Thanos' whereabouts. Shuri, using her unmatched technological expertise, worked to repair the fractured systems and data banks that might help them locate Thanos. The Winter Soldier and Falcon scoured the Earth for any remaining traces of the Mad Titan. Meanwhile, Peter kept the team motivated, reminding them that they were not alone in this fight. He had always been the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and even in the darkest of times, he kept his sense of humor, making the team feel like there was still hope. But as the young heroes closed in on their target, the weight of their mission began to take a toll. The world was still reeling from the snap, and everywhere they went, they encountered remnants of a broken society. People who had lost their loved ones, communities that were struggling to survive, governments that had collapsed under the strain of the snap's effects. Peter found himself facing a dilemma. He was not just a hero now, he was a symbol of hope. His every action, his every word, carried the weight of expectations. The young heroes looked to him for guidance, but Peter was only human. There were moments when he felt the crushing burden of responsibility. He wasn't ready to lead a team of seasoned warriors and protect the world. He missed Tony Stark. He missed the Avengers. But in those moments of doubt, he would look at the faces of the young heroes beside him, Shuri, Falcon, and the others, and he knew that there was no going back. He had to be the leader they needed. Finally, after months of searching, Peter and his team found Thanos. He had retreated to a remote, isolated planet, far from the reach of any other civilization. Thanos, having completed his mission to wipe out half of all life, had retreated into a quiet, self-imposed exile. He had no plans to continue his conquest. In his eyes, the universe was balanced, and there was nothing left for him to fight for. When Peter and the young heroes arrived, they confronted him. Thanos, once a godlike figure with the power to destroy entire worlds, was now a mere shadow of his former self. He had become disillusioned with the universe, seeing himself as a savior who had brought balance but had paid the price with his own soul. Peter, still in his youth but tempered by the challenges he had faced, approached Thanos with determination. He wasn't just seeking revenge. He was fighting for the lives that had been stolen from the universe. The team engaged Thanos in an all-out battle, one that would test their strength, unity, and resolve. Thanos, despite his diminished state, was still an incredibly powerful being. But Peter, with his quick reflexes, intellect, and leadership, coordinated the young heroes to outmaneuver him. It was a fight that seemed impossible. Thanos, the embodiment of power, against a group of young heroes with far less experience. But they had one thing that Thanos did not: hope. Peter's unwavering belief that they could win, that they could undo the snap, gave them the strength to push forward when all seemed lost. The final confrontation came down to a single moment. Peter, wielding the full force of his leadership and his resolve, used his quick thinking to catch Thanos off guard. He and the young heroes worked together to seize the Infinity Gauntlet, taking it from Thanos' hand. Peter, knowing the gravity of the situation, quickly made the decision to use the gauntlet to reverse the snap. But the power of the gauntlet came at a great cost. The energy released in the process was immense, and Peter knew that using it could cost him everything. But he did not hesitate. With the snap of his own, the universe was restored. The half of life that had been wiped away returned. What if Gamora and Nebula switched roles, with Gamora becoming the ruthless killer and Nebula taking on a more heroic path to stop Thanos? The universe had long known Gamora as the deadliest woman in the universe, a feared assassin with unmatched skill and a blood-soaked past. But in this alternate reality, Gamora's fate was different. Born to Thanos as a weapon of destruction, her life had been shaped by cruelty and violence. However, something within her shifted in this reality. The bond of sibling rivalry that once existed between her and Nebula had been flipped on its head. Nebula, the one who had always been painted as Thanos' tool, forced to compete and fight her sister for affection and attention, had found a different path. In this version of events, Nebula chose to rebel against the darkness of her father's influence and seek redemption, while Gamora, left unchecked and fully embracing the violence of her upbringing, fully embraced her role as a killer and a conqueror. It began long before the Guardians of the Galaxy ever crossed paths with the Mad Titan. In this universe, Nebula had grown tired of the pain and torment Thanos had inflicted upon her, tired of being the broken sibling, of being molded into a machine of war. She rebelled. She fought against her father's cruelty, and in doing so, she found a purpose greater than revenge, a purpose built on hope. Nebula began to fight for something beyond her own suffering. She set her sights on stopping her father's ultimate mission, the genocide that would see half of all life in the universe eradicated. Meanwhile, Gamora became Thanos' greatest and most loyal weapon. She had long sought to escape her father's influence, but in this reality, she relished the power that came with her position. Instead of defying him, Gamora embraced the training, the brutality, and the satisfaction that came with her role as Thanos' adopted daughter. Her childhood had been filled with the destruction of entire civilizations, and as she grew, so did her ruthlessness. She was his favored child, his weapon of choice, the one who would conquer worlds in his name. As the years passed, Gamora's heart became as cold and unyielding as the very weapons she wielded. Her green skin became synonymous with fear, and her reputation as an assassin spread across the cosmos like a storm. Nebula, on the other hand, began to see the darkness for what it truly was. She was tired of the endless battles and the feeling of being torn apart by her father's sadistic desires. Over time, she slowly reclaimed her humanity, even if only in part. She began to see herself as more than just a tool, more than just a prize in her father's twisted games. The turning point came during a moment of deep reflection when she realized that the only way to stop Thanos, and to end her endless cycle of torment, was to rebel against him completely. She would join forces with those who had once been her enemies, with those who had fought against Thanos for years. She would fight not for revenge, but for redemption. Nebula chose to be the hero the universe had been waiting for, the one who would stand up against her father's tyrannical reign. The consequences of Gamora and Nebula's reversal were profound. As Gamora became the ruthless enforcer of Thanos' will, she led the charge in conquering planets and bringing them under the Mad Titan's control. Her name was whispered in fear across the stars as she destroyed entire fleets, decimated entire armies, and slaughtered those who opposed Thanos. Her very presence was a harbinger of death, but in her heart, something twisted and broke. The power she wielded only fed her emptiness, leaving her craving more destruction, more control, more bloodshed. With each victory, Gamora's soul seemed to fracture even more, the remnants of the sisterly bond she once shared with Nebula disappearing beneath layers of cold indifference. On the flip side, Nebula, now fully rejecting her father's influence, began to seek out the remaining forces in the universe who could stop Thanos. She knew that her own transformation was a personal battle, but it was also a fight for the survival of all life in the universe. Nebula fought for the people who had no voice, the powerless who had suffered at the hands of her father. She gathered allies, rebels, freedom fighters, and those who had once been under the rule of Thanos. Together, they formed a resistance. Her leadership brought together a diverse group of beings, many of whom had lost loved ones to Thanos' conquest. Nebula became a symbol of hope, and though her past was stained with violence, her future was shaped by the desire to prevent the destruction of the universe. Nebula's journey was not without its challenges. Her past was a constant reminder of the darkness she had emerged from. There were those who doubted her, who saw only the ruthless killer that Thanos had turned her into. But with each victory, each battle fought against the forces of Thanos, Nebula proved that she was more than her past. She was a new force for good, a hero who was willing to face her demons head-on. She confronted her father's influence not by force, but by love. The love she had for her sister, the love she had for those she fought to protect, and the love she found for herself as she stepped away from the chaos that had once defined her. Meanwhile, Thanos, ever the strategist, saw Nebula's rebellion coming but never fully understood the shift within her. He still saw her as a broken tool, an imperfect weapon in his vast arsenal. In his mind, her defection was another form of betrayal, something to be corrected. But he underestimated her. While Gamora was left to carry out his darkest commands, Nebula assembled the forces that could counter him. The universe's mightiest beings rallied to her side: Captain Marvel, the X-Men, the surviving Avengers, and countless other heroes, all united under the banner of resistance. Nebula stood at the forefront of this alliance, determined to stop Thanos, no matter the cost. The final battle took place on a barren, forgotten world. Thanos had begun to assemble the Infinity Stones once again, seeking to complete his mission. With all of his power, he intended to snap the universe into his image, to reshape reality as he saw fit. But Nebula and her new allies were ready. They stormed his stronghold, a final confrontation between a father and daughter, between two beings who had been shaped by the same cruel hand, yet had become polar opposites in their paths. Gamora, the once loyal daughter of Thanos, stood against her sister. The two were locked in an epic battle, one fueled by years of anger, betrayal, and love. Thanos, watching from the shadows, made his move to complete his gauntlet, but Nebula, with the help of her allies, struck him down, shattering his grip on the universe. In the end, it was not just Thanos' death that signified victory, but the rebirth of two sisters who had once been torn apart by their father's violence. Nebula's redemption had come full circle, and Gamora, though still haunted by her path, found a moment of clarity. What if the Hulk snap was successful, but instead of bringing everyone back, it accidentally created a new multiverse where all the alternate versions of the Avengers were merged? The Avengers had fought for years, each member giving their all to stop Thanos and save the universe. After the devastating battle, after the tragic losses, and after the deep sacrifices, there came the moment when Bruce Banner, wielding the mighty Infinity Gauntlet, made the fateful decision to snap. His goal was simple: undo the snap, to bring back the lives that Thanos had erased, to restore balance to the universe. But in a moment of sheer power, the Gauntlet did something unexpected. The Hulk, with his immense strength, was able to wield the power of the Infinity Stones, but the force of their energy was far beyond anything he had ever anticipated. As the snap rang out, instead of simply reversing the effects of Thanos' decimation, a great rift in the fabric of reality itself was torn open. The stones, each possessing a power tied to the fundamental forces of the universe, pulsed with uncontrollable energy. The act of using them to alter the past didn't just reverse Thanos' actions, it reshaped the very multiverse itself. Time, space, and reality began to fracture, each of them breaking into a myriad of possibilities, each universe, each version of the Avengers, merging and colliding. The Hulk snap had inadvertently created a new multiverse, a chaotic amalgamation of different realities, each with its own versions of the Avengers, heroes who had fought in different timelines, under different circumstances, and with different fates. The Avengers, scattered across this new merged reality, were the first to realize something was terribly wrong. Instead of being greeted by the familiar faces of the people they had once lost, they found themselves surrounded by alternate versions of themselves, each one bearing a different history, a different personality, a different vision of what it meant to be an Avenger. The reality had shifted, and now they were all forced to confront their own fractured selves. Steve Rogers, Captain America, found himself face to face with a version of himself who had never been frozen in the ice, never had to endure the horrors of war. Instead, this Steve had been born into a world where he had grown up in the shadow of his father's legacy, a world where the serum had made him more than just a soldier. The shield he carried wasn't the one he knew. It was a blade, a symbol of his more ruthless approach to justice. He struggled to understand this version of himself, this man who seemed to lack the compassion and sense of duty that Steve prided himself on. How could this man, this version of him, represent the ideals that Captain America stood for? Tony Stark, Iron Man, was similarly confused. He stood before an alternate version of himself, one who had never been faced with the loss of his parents, one who had taken the path of science and technology without the burden of guilt or remorse. This Tony had gone further, embracing a darker side of technology, having created a more militarized version of the Iron Man suit. Where the Stark that the Avengers knew had once been driven by a desire for redemption, this Stark was driven by an insatiable hunger for power. The two men were forced to face off, their battle a reflection of the different paths they had taken. One focused on saving the world, the other on bending it to his will. Thor, the god of thunder, now found himself confronted by versions of his own legacy that he had never imagined. One version was the Thor he had been when he was younger, brash and arrogant, before the fall of Asgard and the loss of his brother. Another was a version of himself that had never lost his home and had taken the throne of Asgard in his father's stead. This Thor was older, wiser, and had led his people into a new age of prosperity. There was also a version that had been forged in the fires of war, one who had never let go of his rage and was now more like a storm of vengeance than a hero. Thor, for the first time, saw the vast array of paths that his destiny could have taken. His identity was no longer singular, it was fractured, confused by the different versions of himself standing before him. Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, was no less shaken by the merging of realities. In this new world, she faced a version of herself who had not been trained as an assassin. This version of Natasha had been a soldier in the Russian army, fighting not for S.H.I.E.L.D., but for the Soviet Union. She had taken a different path, one shaped by the Cold War, and had become a reluctant ally to the Avengers. Her past was vastly different from the woman who had fought with them. And then there was another Natasha, one who had never been betrayed by her own past and had never had to make the sacrifices that had led her to join the Avengers. Instead, this Natasha had risen through the ranks of the espionage world and was a leader in her own right. She struggled with the emotions of seeing these versions of herself, versions that had never experienced the same pain or loss, and yet were still so much like her. The most unexpected encounter, however, was with the Hulk himself. Bruce Banner, who had been the one to wield the gauntlet and cause this fracture in the multiverse, found himself face to face with a version of the Hulk that was completely different from the one he knew. This Hulk was not the savage brute he had always struggled to control. This Hulk was intelligent, calculating, and cunning, almost as if Banner's own mind had merged with the Hulk's rage. The two were forced to work together, trying to make sense of the new world they found themselves in while simultaneously struggling to control the chaos within. The merging of these Avengers from different timelines and universes brought with it a deep sense of confusion and instability. The heroes who had fought side by side for so long now found themselves at odds, unsure of who they were and what they stood for. Some of them wanted to find a way to undo the damage caused by the Hulk snap, to fix the multiverse that had been torn apart. Others believed that this new reality was an opportunity to reshape the world in their own image. As the Avengers struggled to come to terms with the new reality they inhabited, a new threat emerged. The chaos of the multiverse was not without consequence. As the barriers between universes weakened, dark forces began to seep through the cracks. Beings of unimaginable power, bent on exploiting the instability for their own gain. These threats were more dangerous than any they had ever faced before. The Avengers, now fractured and divided, had no choice but to unite against this new enemy. But the task was no longer as simple as it once was. The merging of the Avengers meant that they were no longer the cohesive unit they had been. Their shared history, their shared purpose, was fractured, and now they had to overcome their differences in order to save a world that no longer recognized them.